everybody. Today's video is one that really piqued my interest. When I learned about this one, it genuinely made me think of a book title or something you would see in a movie. Also, the geographical location of where this crime took place is relatively close to where I live. I had never heard of this case before, but let me tell you, it is crazy and to this day remains unsolved. A small resort town where families would go to vacation in quaint little cabins would turn into the site of an absolute nightmare and forever tarnish this town as a place where families could go safely vacation. Today, we will be talking about the murder in cabin number 28 in the town of Getty, a small settlement in Plumas County, California. In this town, under the cover of darkness, a quadruple homicide took place that has echoed throughout the stories of this town since its occurrence. Keddie is a small settlement in Plumas County, California, which is a short distance from Quincy. Its only calling card is the Getty Y, a railroad junction named after Arthur Getty and completed in the year 1909. Since its completion, the population of this settlement has consistently remained below 100. So clearly this is a teeny tiny area. However, from 1978 until 1981, this area had become a bustling resort location for tourists. Thanks to the Getty Resort, which was a collection of 33 wooden cabins. These cabins were rented out for approximately $200 per month and attracted hikers for the long wooded trails that surrounded the area. And there were also nearby streams that were really great for fishing. However, on April 11th of 1981, this once quaint settlement would forever be tarnished. Known as the Keddie Murders, the unsolved quadruple murders took place in cabin number 36-year-old Sue Sharp and her 5 children had been living in cabin number 28 for 5 months at this point, having moved to the area from across the country in Connecticut in order to be close to her brother. She rented a trailer from her brother before settling at cabin 28 at the Getty Resort. Sue decided to move to California once she had separated from her abusive husband, James Sharp, who was very against her taking their children all the way to California. But she did just that, and despite this cross-country move, everything really went well for the most part, and everyone began to settle in. Sheila had made some friends in the town, and so it was not uncommon for her to stay at a friend's house for sleepovers, as is typical for teenagers. However, on that fateful spring morning, Sheila walked back from the sleepover and entered through the front door of the cabin to an absolute horror. She would walk in to discover the body of her mother, her 15-year-old brother Johnny, and his 17-year-old friend Dana Wingate. All 3 had been tied up, brutally stabbed, and beaten to death with a claw hammer. And at that time, Sheila's 12-year-old sister Tina was nowhere to be seen. Her youngest brothers, 5-year-old Greg and 10-year-old Rick, were asleep in one of the bedrooms with a friend, Justin Smart. All 3 victims had been tied up with electrical cord and wiring around their ankles and wrists. Sue was found covered by a bloody yellow blanket. Now, as you can imagine, at this discovery, Sheila ran away from the cabin, screaming at the top of her lungs. She was terrified, obviously so, from seeing her family in such a horrific condition. She collapsed through the door of her friend's cabin, who thankfully raised the alarm and called the sheriff's department. This was a member of the Seabolt family in cabin 27, and they ran to the lodge at Getty Resort, placing a call to the police to alert them of the murders. As police were on their way to the crime scene, Sheila remembered that her 2 younger brothers, Greg and Rick, were still inside the cabin with their friend. But miraculously, all 3 boys were unharmed. The Seabolt family and Sheila helped the boys climb out of the bedroom window, and seemingly they had slept through this entire massacre. Suddenly, tales of murder had broken the peace and serenity of Getty, and as we all know now, would forever be tarnished by it. Deputy Hank Clement was the first officer on the scene. He immediately notices that these murders had been particularly vicious. In addition to being tied up with this electrical wire and bludgeoned, Sue and John indicated that they were mobile at some point during the attack and had stepped in the blood. There had even been blood discovered on both of the bedroom doors and outside on the handrails of the back steps. It was soon discovered by police that Sheila's younger sister Tina was missing from the cabin. Tina had wanted to stay overnight at the Seabolt's cabin with Sheila, but Sue had not allowed her to do so. Members of the Plumas County Search and Rescue Team scoured the Getty area for Tina, but did not come back successful. An all-points bulletin was put out to Lassen, Butte, and Sierra counties, as well as Reno, which are all fairly close counties / towns in the area, alerting them to keep an eye out for Tina. Tina was described as having long, blonde hair and of slight build. She was wearing blue jeans and a blue shirt when she was last seen the night before. The bulletin also asked the same areas to check with local hospitals to see if anybody had come in during the last 48 hours with knife injuries. They had speculated that with such a violent attack, the killer or killers must have been armed to some extent in the process. These gruesome murders sent shockwaves throughout this community. Investigators tried to piece together the last known moments of the victims. Witnesses said that they saw John and Dana trying to thumb a ride near the corner of Crescent Street in Quincy near the Gold Band Motel. This was at some time between 9 p.m. and 10 p.m. on the night of the murders. However, their whereabouts after that time is unknown, but what we do know is that at some point over the next 10 hours, the teenage boys ended up back at the Getty Resort where they were murdered. Early on in the investigation, robbery was ruled out as a motive since nothing from the cabin appeared to be missing. Investigators surmised that the murders had been somewhat planned and had been perpetrated by 2 or more assailants, one of which brought the claw hammer and then used an additional hammer and 2 knives found inside the cabin. But the most perplexing thing about this murder to investigators was that this case around the clock and even implemented a secret witness program to convince any witnesses to come forward so they could even get the slightest lead. As weeks turned to months and months to years, the investigation resorted to responding to leads as and when they came in. But then Justin came forward and claimed that he had woken up at some point in the night and witnessed the murders. So, while it was initially reported that Justin had slept through this entire ordeal, he would later give conflicting stories to investigators about that night. While first of all he said that he witnessed nothing, he later claimed that he had in fact witnessed the murders from the bedroom door. However, later Justin once again changed his story and relayed that he had only dreamt of the murder. Convinced they had something anyway, investigators put Justin under hypnosis, and it was through this process he was able to recall the faces of two men, both wearing glasses, one with a mustache and one with long shoulder-length hair. Justin recalled that one of the men had a pocket knife in his right hand, which he used to cut Sue in the chest. In his dream, this same man had a hammer in the other hand. In another hypnosis session, Justin described Tina waking up and walking into the living room to see what was going on. And according to Justin, a man then snatched Tina up in his arms and carried her through the kitchen and out the back steps. And then moments later, the man returned to the cabin alone. A psychologist evaluated Justin's description of the dream and came to the conclusion that Justin had witnessed the murders, and then as a defense mechanism that he converted what he actually saw and convinced himself it was a dream. Given Justin's description of the potential suspects, they released sketches of these two men who were seen in Quincy the week before the murders. These men were seen by more than one witness, according to Plumas County Sheriff Doug Thomas, but these two men were never identified, and eventually the tips dwindled to a trickle before diminishing almost completely. There was a lot of speculation over the years that the killers had wanted to get Tina for sexual purposes. Some even clung to the hope that Tina was alive somewhere and being held hostage. But in April of 1984, a hunter stumbled across human remains near Feather Falls, which is about 50 miles from Getty. And these remains were sent to a laboratory for analysis and identification. And with the use of confirming through dental records, the remains were identified as Tina. According to the medical examiner, Tina had died sometime after November 1st of 1981, 6 months after the Getty Murders took place. And due to advanced decomposition, given that her body was found roughly 3 years later, her cause of death could not be determined, but it was accepted unanimously that she was murdered. Since then, theories as to who committed was never enough physical evidence for anybody to be charged. One theory that was put forward by investigators early on was that the people who had picked John and Dana up in Quincy when they were hitchhiking were the people responsible for the murders. A potential scenario was that after dropping John and Dana at the cabin, the killers then forced their way inside, or had maybe even potentially been invited in by the teenagers. Another theory was that the driver had nothing to do with the murders, and under that scenario, investigators speculated that John and Dana walked in on the slayings and became victims themselves. Earlier in that evening, before John and Dana had hitchhiked back to the cabin, they had attended a party at the home of a well-known Quincy family. However, there was said to be illicit drug use at the party, so potential witnesses refrained from coming forward. Investigators had also considered that the killers had been at the same party and then followed Dana and John back home. And in fact, there had been reports that there was a pair of men at the party that were said to be acting very peculiar, but these two men were never identified, as I think tends to happen when such crazy crimes happen that nobody is expecting. Rumors start to fly around, and one rumor in particular came about early on that these murders were the work of a cult, but that was also ruled out early on in the investigation. Fast forward to 1996. Robert Joseph Silveria Jr. was looked at as a potential suspect. He had lived in Plumas County in the mid-1980s and was known as a courteous man who decorated envelopes with intricate drawings during his time as a county employee. But he was arrested in 1996 and suspected of at least 17 murders. For 15 years, Silveria had drifted throughout the United States on railroads, killing other drifters he came in contact with. Following his arrest, he confessed to 28 murders, including the Getty Murders, although he would only be convicted of 2 of those murders. But it would later be uncovered that during the time of the murder, Silveria had actually been in custody for grand theft auto. So I don't know why he said that he committed these murders when he really didn't, when he had an alibi. I don't know if he wanted to just be attached to them to increase his body count number. Truthfully, I don't know why, and it's not indicated in any of the research that I've done. Among the first suspects to emerge in this case were Martin Ray Smart and John Bobetti. Over the years, Smart and Bobetti have remained lead suspects, and in fact, Justin had been the stepson of Smart, and the family lived in one of the cabins next to Sue. At the time of these murders, despite Getty being a resort town, there was a drug problem in the area, and one of the key players was murdered. It was said that she was counseling Smart's wife, Marilyn, about leaving her husband because he was allegedly abusive and having affairs behind her back. You might know where this one is going. There had been speculation among investigators that Smart had learned of Sue and Marilyn's conversations. Smart was an extremely jealous and possessive man, and according to some investigators, so was Marilyn. Some of the investigators had speculated that it wasn't just Smart and Boubede who were involved in the slayings, but instead a number of other local people. Based on this, many investigators have reached the conclusion that the intended victim that night was Sue, and the others were murdered simply because they were witnesses. Shortly after the murders, Smart was questioned and had informed investigators that a hammer of his had recently gone missing. And shortly thereafter, Smart and Boubede both left Plumas County for Klamath Falls, Oregon. And it was here that Smart wrote a letter to Marilyn, which he professed his love for her and concluded the letter with, "I have paid the price for your love, and now I've bought it with 4 people's lives." So to me, that's an absolute admission of guilt. We know that there were 2 men in the area that were suspicious. Justin describes that there were 2 men. It would explain to me why Justin was so traumatized, in addition to just seeing a horrible murder scene. But this was his stepfather. To me, it's not far-fetched at all why Justin's story went back and forth over the years. In 2016, it was revealed that an anonymous counselor at the Veterans Administration in Reno came forward with information that implicated Smart in the Getty Murders. As we know, Smart left for Oregon because at the time that he was in Keddie, there was not enough information to charge him, and so he was able to leave despite being a suspect. According to this counselor, Smart had confessed to the brutal murders while a patient just several weeks after the murders occurred. He claimed that he wanted to clear his conscience and admitted to killing Sue and Tina, who at that point in time had still remained missing. According to this anonymous counselor, he said that Smart confessed to killing the woman and the daughter, but stated that he had nothing to do with the boy's murder. The counselor pressed further and asked why Tina didn't run away, and Smart replied that he had incapacitated her and later had to kill her because she was a witness. As for a motive, the counselor claimed that Smart believed that Sue was responsible for Marilyn wanting a divorce. However, the Department of Justice would dismiss the allegations as hearsay despite this potential confession that we've learned about. Both Smart and Boubede passed lie detectors during the original investigation, so neither were ever arrested, and both have since died. Despite an exhaustive investigation, the Keddie murders technically still remain unsolved today. However, I don't necessarily believe that these are truly unsolved. I believe that Smart and Boubede visitors are those with a morbid fascination seeking out Cabin 28, which was demolished in 2004. And while the murders supposedly remain unsolved for almost 4 decades, the investigators still hold on to the hope that one day justice can be served. In 2018, new DNA evidence suggested that there may be a living suspect who had ties to the murder, but the investigation ended with no ultimate revelation. So that concludes the case of the murder in Cabin 28. As always, y'all, please let me know what you think. This one is buck wild to me because I feel like they had the killers. I believe that those 2 men did it. Like, it all makes sense to me. They were there. Smart even confessed to this counselor. He wrote a letter to Marilyn saying he paid the price of her love with 4 bodies. Like, I'm sorry. How much more information do you need? But the fact that they were able to pass lie detectors, like, that's it. They can't be the killer, question mark. We know that people can, beat a polygraph test or whatever they're called. These men had criminal histories. These men were, to an extent, tenured criminals, so they had probably been through lie detectors before, so who's to say they didn't figure out how to beat it? I don't know. I obviously have no evidence to base that on, but it just baffles me that these men were able to leave off to Oregon and to live out their lives while 4 other people were dead. Let me know if you agree or disagree with that, or if you have any other theories yourself. Thank you for joining me today.